My name is Valentina Ibarra. I am 26 years old, and I used to believe that if I worked hard enough inside my family's walls, they would eventually see me. I was wrong. I grew up in a house that ran on hierarchy first and love second, in that order, never reversed. My father, Ernesto Ibarra, built a regional landscaping and property maintenance company out of almost nothing over 30 years. Started with 2 trucks and a handshake reputation in the suburbs north of San Antonio, and turned it into a 60-employee operation with contracts across 4 counties. He was proud of that. He said it every Sunday at dinner, the same story in a slightly different order, the same pause before the number of trucks he'd started with, the same look he gave my older brother Marco when he finished, like the whole thing was a baton he was already in the process of handing over. I was the second child and the only daughter, which in our house meant something specific. It meant I was included at the table but not in the plans. It meant I was trusted to handle the bookkeeping when Marco was busy and untrusted to have an opinion about what I found there. I had a desk in the back office of the main yard from the time I was 19, a proper desk with a monitor and a filing cabinet and a key to the building, and I sat at it 5 days a week for 6 years and kept the accounts for a company whose future had never once been discussed with me. I want to be precise about what I did there because it matters later. I managed accounts payable and receivable for all active contracts, at peak 63 separate accounts. I ran payroll for the full crew every 2 weeks without a single error in 6 years. I built the estimate templates my father still used, the ones that cut his quoting time in half because I standardized the labor hour calculations he used to do on a notepad in different formats every time. I caught a $14,000 billing discrepancy with a county parks contract in my second year that would have triggered an audit. Found it on a Tuesday afternoon, corrected it before Thursday, and was told by my father that it was good I had caught it, and then the subject was closed. He did not mention it again. I also took on the vendor relationship management starting in my 3rd year when my father's back made long phone calls difficult. I negotiated a new fuel contract that saved the company roughly $8,000 annually. I am not saying these things to build a case for a promotion I was never going to receive anyway. I am saying them because they are the specific texture of the invisible, and because you cannot understand what Christmas night felt like without first understanding what the 6 years before it felt like. My grandfather, my father's father, was named Celestino Ibarra. He died when I was 23, a Tuesday in March, a slow illness that gave us time to say goodbye and not enough time to actually do it. He had been the quiet center of our family in a way my father never quite replicated, not loud about it, not sentimental, just steady. He used to sit with me at the kitchen table when I was a girl and ask me what I had noticed that week, not what I had done, what I had noticed, and he seemed genuinely interested in the answer every time. When he died, he left me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a single bank card, old, the kind with the raised numbers, not the flat-printed modern style. The note said the account had been opened for me when I was born and that he had been adding to it quietly over the years whenever he could, and that it was mine alone, not the family's, and that I should use it when I needed it most. I put the card in the back of my wallet, behind my license, and I left it there for 3 years. I did not use it. I did not check the balance. I was not ready to, and I could not explain why, except that touching it felt like spending something I needed to keep whole. If you've ever held on to something a person you loved left you, not because it was valuable but because letting it sit untouched felt like a way of keeping them close, then you already understand the next part of this story better than I could explain it. The card was still in my wallet on the night my father told me to get out. The incident that defined the pattern happened 2 years before Christmas, in October, at a Sunday dinner that started normally and ended in a way I have never quite been able to fold back into ordinary memory. My father had spent that week in meetings with a commercial property developer named Hargrove. I never knew his first name, everyone just called him Hargrove, who was putting together a large mixed-use development on the east side and wanted a long-term grounds maintenance contract. It was the kind of contract that would have represented a significant step up for the company, the kind that requires insurance upgrades, crew expansion, and a bid packet that goes through multiple review rounds. My father had been agitated all week, the way he got when something important was within reach and he was not certain his hands were big enough to hold it. At dinner that Sunday, he mentioned the bid. He said Hargrove wanted the numbers by Friday and that Marco was going to sit in on the final meeting Thursday morning. I had already run the preliminary numbers. I had done it Wednesday afternoon without being asked, because it was the kind of calculation that fell naturally into what I did, and because I had seen the contract specifications in my father's email when I was cross-referencing a vendor invoice and had pulled the relevant figures. I had a draft estimate, a labor hour projection, and a margin analysis that showed where our current crew capacity would max out and at what point we would need to hire, all of it organized in the format my templates used. I said I had already put together a draft bid packet if it would be useful for Thursday. My father looked at me across the table. My mother was refilling the water glasses. Marco was cutting his food. My father said, "That's Marco's meeting, Valentina." I said I understood that. I said I was only offering the numbers if they helped. He said, "I think we have it covered." I squared my fork against the edge of my plate and said nothing. My mother sat back down. Marco said something about the Hargrove timeline that I did not fully hear. The conversation moved on. I stayed at the table until dessert was finished because leaving early would have made it into something, and I did not want to give it that weight in front of everyone, even though it already had it. Afterward, in the car on the way home, I sat with the particular stillness that comes not from being calm but from having used up all your words on deciding not to say them. The bid packet I had built was sitting on my desktop at the office. Marco used a version of it Thursday, though the formatting was different and 3 of my labor hour calculations had been manually adjusted to numbers that were slightly too low. They got the contract. The margin on the first year was thinner than it should have been. I did not say that either. What I understood from that Sunday was not new information. I had known the shape of it for years, but it was the first time it had been stated out loud in company, plainly, without apology, in a way that made it the official version. That's Marco's meeting. Not, we don't need the help. Not, let's look at it together. The sentence landed with the finality of a thing that had always been true and was now simply being said. Over the following weeks, I noticed that my father had started directing certain vendor calls to Marco that he had previously routed through me. Not all of them. Enough that the shape was visible. Marco did not ask me to brief him on the accounts he was being handed. He assumed he already understood them, which he did not, and I could see in the numbers by November that 2 of the relationships were drifting in ways that would require correction. I corrected them myself in the background without telling either of them. I was not angry, exactly. I was something more like tired in a specific place, a tiredness that lived behind the sternum and did not go away when I slept. The October dinner was not the beginning. It was just the moment I could point to later and say, "There, that was when I stopped expecting it to be different." The beginning was earlier. Closer to the start. I was 20 years old the first time I caught an error that saved the company real money. It was a fuel vendor invoice, one of the smaller suppliers we used for the satellite yard equipment, and there was a line item that had been double billed across 3 consecutive months, a cumulative overcharge of just under $3,200. I caught it because I had built my own cross-reference log for vendor payments, a spreadsheet my father had not asked me to build, that I had made because the existing records were kept in a format that made error checking slow. I flagged it, called the vendor, got a credit memo, and logged the resolution. My father's response when I showed him the credit memo was to nod and say that was why we needed someone careful on the books. Someone. Not me by name. Someone careful. Like I was a position being correctly filled rather than a person who had just spent 4 hours on a problem he hadn't known existed. I kept the cross-reference log updated for the next 6 years. It caught 4 more billing discrepancies in that time. The $14,000 county parks issue was the largest. I handled all of them the same way. Found it, corrected it, logged it, moved on. By the 3rd one I had stopped mentioning them to my father at all. He would nod, say something about carefulness, and return to whatever he had been doing. The mention cost me something small each time and returned nothing, so I stopped making it. When I was 22, I took on the insurance renewal coordination because the broker my father had used for 12 years retired, and the transition to a new broker had fallen through the cracks during a busy spring season. I spent 3 weeks learning what I needed to know, contacted 4 brokers for quotes, compared the coverage structures, and recommended one that reduced our annual premium by just over $6,000 while maintaining equivalent coverage limits. My father signed the new policy. He did not ask how I had found the broker or compared the options. The savings appeared in the year-end numbers. No one named them. Let me be plain about the inventory of those 6 years, because I want you to understand what 6 years of invisible work actually looks like written out in one place. I maintained payroll for 60-plus employees across 6 years, over 150 payroll cycles, with no errors that required correction. I built the estimating templates that are still in use. I caught and recovered more than $17,000 in billing errors across 5 separate incidents. I negotiated the fuel contract that saved approximately $8,000 per year, which over 3 years of continued use meant roughly $24,000 in cumulative savings. I managed 63 active client accounts at peak. I coordinated the insurance renewal that reduced premiums by $6,000 annually. I absorbed the vendor relationship management portfolio when my father's health made it difficult, maintained it for 3 years, and handed back only what was actively requested. None of this was in a job description. None of it had a title attached to it. I did not have a salary with a raise structure or a performance review or a year-end acknowledgement. I had a desk and a key and the implicit understanding that what I did there was necessary but not important, which is a specific cruelty that is very easy to sustain because it never has to say itself out loud. The second incident I want to tell you about happened when I was 24, 2 years before the end. There was a crew supervisor named Delgado, no relation to me, who had been with the company for 11 years and was one of my father's most trusted field leads. In the spring of that year, Delgado approached me, not my father, not Marco, me, and told me quietly that he had concerns about a billing pattern on one of the newer county contracts. He had noticed that the labor hours being submitted for certain job sites were higher than what he was actually scheduling, and he wanted to flag it before it became a problem. I spent 2 weeks pulling records, cross-referencing timesheets against the site logs Delgado gave me access to, and mapping the discrepancy. What I found was not malicious. It was a data entry issue in the new field reporting software that was auto-populating a legacy labor code onto certain job categories and inflating the submitted hours. No money had been paid out incorrectly yet because the invoices were still in a 60-day processing window. I corrected the software setting, amended the pending invoices, and drafted a 1-page explanation for my father that laid out what had happened and how it had been fixed. My father read it. He said good. He said he would mention it to Marco so he could keep an eye on the software going forward. Delgado came to find me the following week and asked if everything had been resolved. I told him yes. He looked at me in a way that said he understood more about the resolution than I had stated, and he thanked me in a tone that was quieter than the situation seemed to require. I had not realized, until he thanked me that way, how much I had needed someone in that building to see what I had done. I thought about that look for a long time afterward. I thought about it on Christmas night, in the parking lot of a bank. The Christmas dinner had been planned the way our family planned everything. My mother's logistics, my father's expectations, Marco's easy assumption that the shape of the evening would conform to whatever he wanted from it. I arrived at my parents' house at 4 in the afternoon with a dish I had made, a rice thing my grandfather had liked, because bringing food was the kind of small gesture that kept the evening from starting on the wrong foot. Marco was already there with his girlfriend, Priya, who was pleasant and slightly watchful in the way people are when they are still learning which dynamics in a room they need to navigate. My mother was in the kitchen. My father was in the living room with the television on low, watching something he wasn't really watching. The first 2 hours were ordinary. Dinner was served at 6. The food was good. The conversation stayed on surfaces. Marco's girlfriend's work, a neighbor's renovation, something about the January weather. My father was in a quieter mood than usual, not cold, just internal, the way he got when something was turning over in him that he hadn't finished deciding yet. It came out over dessert. My father said he had been thinking about the company's structure going forward. He said he and my mother had had some conversations with an attorney about succession and that he wanted to get everything properly organized in the new year. He looked at Marco when he said it. He said Marco had been stepping into more responsibility, which was good, and that the plan was to move toward a formal transfer of operational leadership over the next 18 months. I was holding my fork. I set it down. I asked, in a voice that I kept level, where that left the back-office operations, the accounts, payroll, the vendor relationships. My father said they were thinking of bringing in an outside bookkeeping firm to handle the administrative side. He said it would simplify things. He said it in the tone of a man describing a minor logistical improvement, like changing the brand of paper towels used in the yard office. I said, I have managed those accounts for 6 years. My father said, I know that, Valentina. My mother was looking at her dessert plate. Marco said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. I said, the estimating templates, the payroll systems, the vendor contracts, those are mine. I built them. My father said, and they'll be transitioned. The firm will learn the systems. I said, Dad. He said, we think this is cleaner. For the family. I squared the napkin in my lap and said nothing for a moment. Then I asked if this had been the plan for a long time or if it was recent. He said they had been thinking about it for a while. I asked if I had been included in any of that thinking. He said, these are difficult decisions. Which was an answer that was also not an answer, and he knew that, and I knew that he knew, and the table was very quiet for a few seconds in a way that had a specific texture to it, like the moment after a door closes in an empty house. I said I needed some air and I excused myself. I walked to the front hallway, got my coat, and went outside. The street was quiet. It was cold but not biting, that dry Texas winter cold that sits on the skin without going through it. I stood on the front step for a few minutes. Through the window I could see the dining room light, my mother clearing plates, Marco saying something to Priya. Normal. Like the conversation at the table had been about the paper towels after all. I went back inside to get my bag. My father was standing in the hallway. He said, I think it would be better if you didn't come into the office in January. To make the transition cleaner. I looked at him. I said, you're letting me go. He said, I'm restructuring. It's not personal. I said, I don't have anywhere to sleep tonight if I go home and think about this. Can we talk tomorrow? He said, I think it's better to have a clean break. Your things at the office, I'll have them boxed. He was not cruel about it. That was the thing that was almost harder than if he had been. He said it the way he said everything that was settled in his mind. Flatly, from behind a decision that had already been made somewhere I was not present, delivered to me as information rather than a conversation. My mother appeared at the end of the hallway. She looked at my father, then at me, and she said, Valentina, and then stopped. I picked up my bag. I said goodnight. I did not wait to see if anyone was going to say anything else, because I had learned over 6 years that waiting in that house for the thing that was not coming was the longest way to spend any unit of time. I walked to my car. The cold hit me properly when I got to the end of the driveway, the kind that makes your eyes go sharp. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, and my chest went tight in a way I had no name for, the kind of tightening that lives just below the throat and does not release all at once. I breathed through it. I put my hands on the wheel and held them still. I had $312 in my checking account. And in the back of my wallet, behind my license, was an old card with raised numbers that my grandfather had pressed into my hand 3 years ago and told me to use when I needed it most. I needed it now. I drove to the one bank branch I knew would be open on Christmas night, a 24-hour location on the main commercial strip, the kind that stays lit and staffed because the city never fully stops, and I walked through the glass doors at 20 minutes past 8 with my grandfather's card in my hand and very little idea of what I was about to find. The branch was the kind that never fully dimmed. Fluorescent overhead panels, a security guard near the door reading something on his phone, 2 teller windows open with the particular stillness of a holiday shift where nothing much is expected to happen. A small artificial tree sat on the counter near the door, white lights, no ornaments. I walked to the nearest teller. A young woman with her name tag slightly crooked, and I said I needed to check the balance on an account. I set the card on the counter. She looked at it. Then she looked at me. She picked up the card carefully, the way you handle something when you are not sure what category it belongs to, and she typed something. Then she typed something else. Then she was quiet for a moment that was slightly longer than balance check moments usually are. She said, "Can you give me just 1 second?" She walked to the back without the card. I stood at the counter. The security guard turned a page. The other teller was counting something in a drawer. The artificial tree threw small white circles of light onto the counter surface, and I watched them and did not think about anything specific while I waited. A man came out from the back, Older, jacket over his dress shirt, the kind of person who had been called in from somewhere or had simply never left. He had the card in his hand. He looked at me and said, "Ms. Ibarra?" I said yes. He said, "Would you mind stepping over here for a moment?" He gestured toward a small side office, the kind with a glass partition and 2 chairs across a desk. I followed him in. He closed the door. He sat down and he looked at the card again and then he looked at me. He said, "This account was opened in 1998. The primary account holder was Celestino Ibarra." I said, "My grandfather." He said, "Yes." He paused. "He named you as the sole beneficiary at account opening, and the account has been continuously maintained. There are deposit records going back over 20 years. He turned his monitor slightly toward me so I could see the screen. "Ms. Ibarra, the current balance in this account is $483,000. My breath caught. I heard it. I processed each word individually, the way you do when a sentence is too large to take in as a unit. I said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again?" He said it again. $483,000. My grandfather had been putting money into an account in my name since before I could remember. Quietly. Steadily. The way he did everything, without announcement, without audience, without a Sunday dinner story about it. He had opened it the year my father started the company, and he had been adding to it across every year of my life that I could recall, and across the 3 years since he died, the interest alone had continued to accumulate. The manager, his name was printed on a small stand on the desk, Gerald Okafor, pulled up the deposit history and walked me through the pattern. Twice a year, consistent, sometimes a little more in years where something had clearly gone well, never less than a certain floor amount. The last deposit had been made 14 months before his death, and the amount was larger than the others, as if he had known he was running out of time to add to it. I sat with that for a moment. I capped the pen I had been holding. I had taken it from the cup on the desk without realizing and set it down. Gerald Okafor let the silence sit. He was good at his job in that specific way that has nothing to do with the job description. Then he explained the process for transferring the account to my sole control, which my grandfather had structured so that it required only my identification and signature upon his death, no other family member's involvement, no cosigner, nothing. He had built the whole thing so that it could not be contested or complicated from the outside. He had thought about this. He had thought about it for a long time. I signed what needed signing. Gerald Okafor made copies. He slid a new card across the desk and a printed statement with the balance at the top. I folded the statement and put it in my coat pocket. He said, "Is there anything else I can help you with tonight, Ms. Ibarra?" I said, "No. Thank you." I paused. "Do you know if there's anything open nearby? I need somewhere to sit for a little while." He said there was a diner 2 blocks east that was open on holidays. I thanked him and walked back through the lobby. The security guard looked up as I passed. The artificial tree was still throwing white circles onto the counter. Outside, the cold met me at the door and I walked to my car and sat in it for several minutes without starting the engine. $483,000. My grandfather, who had asked me every week what I had noticed, had spent my entire life noticing me back. I did not go back to my parents' house that night. I drove to a motel on the commercial strip, paid for 2 nights in cash from my checking account, and sat on the edge of the bed with the printed bank statement on the nightstand and my phone face down beside it. I called my grandfather's attorney the next morning. His name was Ramon Fuentes, and I had met him once at the funeral when he had given me his card and told me quietly that if I ever needed to speak with him about my grandfather's affairs, I should call. I had not called. I called now. He was not surprised to hear from me. He told me that my grandfather had updated his estate documents 18 months before his death, and that in addition to the savings account, there was a separate letter, sealed in Fuentes's file, that my grandfather had intended for me to read when I accessed the account. Fuentes mailed it that day. I met my father and Marco at the office on the 27th. I had asked for the meeting by text, which I almost never did, and I think the formality of it, a text rather than a phone call, signaled something to my father, because when I arrived he was seated at his desk rather than standing at the door the way he usually was when I came in. Marco was there too, near the window, hands in his pockets. I sat down across from my father. I had the bank statement in my coat pocket. I had something else too, the letter from my grandfather, which had arrived that morning by overnight mail, and which I had read 3 times and knew well enough by now to quote from. My father said, "I'm glad you came in. I wanted to talk through the transition timeline." I said, "I'd like to do something first." He looked at me. I said, "You told me at the October dinner 2 years ago that the Hargrove meeting was Marco's meeting and that you had it covered. I had built the bid packet you used." He said, "Valentina." I said, "I'm not finished." He was quiet. I said, "You told me when I flagged the county software billing issue that it was good I had caught it. That's all you said. 2 weeks of work. 4 figures in pending invoice corrections. That was all." Marco shifted near the window. I said, "On Christmas night you told me that bringing in an outside firm would make things cleaner. For the family. And that my things at the office would be boxed." I reached into my coat pocket and produced the bank statement. I did not unfold it dramatically. I set it on the desk, face up, slid it across to him. I said, "While you were deciding what was cleaner for the family, Grandfather was building something for me. He opened this account the year you started the company. He put money into it twice a year for over 2 decades. He structured it so that no one else could touch it or contest it. He did this quietly, without telling anyone, because I think he understood something about this family that took me longer to see." My father looked at the statement. The number was at the top of the page. I said, "He asked me every week what I had noticed. He was the only person in this family who ever asked me that." My father's face had gone through several things in a short time. He said, "Valentina, this doesn't change." I said, "I know it doesn't change your plan. I'm not here to argue about your plan." I picked up the statement and returned it to my pocket. I said, "I'm here because I wanted you to know that I was not nothing here. I ran payroll for 6 years without an error. I recovered $17,000 in billing mistakes you never knew existed. I built every template this office still uses. I saved this company $14,000 on a county contract that would have triggered an audit, and your response was to tell me it was good I had caught it and then move on." I stood. I said, "You told me at Christmas that I couldn't do anything on my own. I want you to understand that I have been doing things on my own in this building for 6 years. You just weren't watching." Marco said, "Val." I said, "I know you weren't watching either, Marco." I picked up my bag. My father said my name. Once, with a weight in it I had not heard before, the kind that comes when someone finally locates a feeling they had been successfully avoiding. I said, "Goodbye, Dad." I walked out. I did not close the door hard. I pulled it behind me the way you pull a door when there are people in the next room who are sleeping, careful and complete. In the outer office, Delgado was at the yard schedule board. He looked at me. He did not ask anything. He nodded once, the same way he had thanked me the week I fixed the software issue, in a tone that said more than the gesture. I nodded back and walked out into the cold. My mother called me that evening. She did not defend my father. She said she was sorry, which was something, and she said she had not known about the account, which I believed. She cried a little. I told her I was all right. I told her I would call her after the new year. Marco texted 2 days later. He said he hadn't known either about the account or about the full scope of what I had been doing. He said that badly, in the way Marco said most things, but I think he meant it. I did not reply that week. I replied later when I had more room for it. I read my grandfather's letter 4 times in total before I felt like I had finished with it. He did not explain himself at length. He was not that kind of writer. But there was one paragraph near the middle where he said he had watched me working in that office since I was 19 years old, and that he had seen what was happening and what was not being said, and that he wanted me to have something that was entirely mine, not borrowed from anyone's goodwill, not contingent on anyone's recognition. He wrote, "I want you to have roots that no one can pull up." I have thought about that sentence many times in the months since. What I know now, that I did not fully know on Christmas night, is that being unseen by the people closest to you does not mean you are invisible. It means they are not looking. Those are different problems, and only one of them is yours to solve. I did not set out to prove anything to my father. I did not walk into that office on the 27th with a plan to deliver a speech or land a moment. I went because I thought he should know what his father had known. That I had been there, that the work had been real, that the quiet accumulation of 6 years of careful labor had existed whether or not anyone named it. I wanted him to have that information. What he did with it was his. What I did with it was leave. I have since put a portion of the account toward a small business registration and an operating account for the consulting practice I had been thinking about for longer than I had admitted to myself. I have 2 clients. The work is steady and the hours are mine, and nobody boxes my things at the end of a December dinner and calls it restructuring. My grandfather started adding to that account the same year my father started the company. I do not think that was a coincidence. I think he was placing a bet, quietly, over decades, on the person he thought would need it most and use it best. I do not know if I am living up to that bet yet. I think about it when I sit down at my desk in the morning and when I close my laptop at night. The thing I keep returning to is this. Some people build things loudly, with an audience, with a Sunday dinner story about where they started and how far they have come. And some people build things in the way my grandfather built things, a little at a time, without announcement, over so many years that by the time anyone thinks to look, the roots have already gone deep. I am trying to be the second kind. If this story made you feel something you've been carrying quietly for a while, share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know who's been waiting for the right words. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.